A group of priests are clamoring for the world's bishops to address the Church's pastoral crisis and give some clarity. They have the support of a prominent American cardinal. Raymond Burke joins us tonight from Rome. And later, papal biographer and theologian George WEIGEL talks about his latest book, The Fragility of Order, Catholic Reflections on Turbulent Times. An entrepreneur and former candidate for EU Parliament, DECLAN GANLEY, is here. He'll discuss the upcoming referendum that could legalize abortion in Catholic Ireland. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Cardinal Raymond Burke, George WEIGEL, and DECLAN GANLEY are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo, or you can email me at worldover@ewtn.com. Now, some news from the world over. A split German bishops' conference met with Vatican officials on Thursday to discuss their proposal to give Holy Communion to the Protestant spouses of Catholics in certain cases. The majority of the German bishops support the idea, including their president, Cardinal Reinhard Marx. 7 bishops have appealed to the Vatican directly to prevent the proposal from being enacted. In the end, it will be Pope Francis's decision whether to uphold traditional church teaching on the reception of the Eucharist or approve, in full or in part, the German bishop's proposal. Critics say allowing intercommunion would be a break with doctrine and practice. The Pope's position is not known, but he did appear to endorse a similar idea at a meeting with Lutherans in 2015. Meanwhile, a day after personally meeting Pope Francis, pop star and American Idol host Katy Perry extolled the benefits of transcendental meditation for children at a Vatican-hosted event. The New Age practice, which Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger warned against in 1999, took center stage as Perry joined a discussion titled Impacting Children's Health Through Meditation Globally. Perry said that transcendental meditation brought her a stillness beyond anything she's ever experienced. As head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, Cardinal Ratzinger, later Benedict XVI, said that transcendental meditation can degenerate into a cult of the body and can lead surreptitiously to considering all bodily sensations as spiritual experiences. Perry is a vocal supporter of Planned Parenthood and is embroiled in a real estate battle with a group of nuns she intends to buy their compound. And a growing number of priests are asking the world's bishops to reaffirm church teaching in what they are calling a pastoral crisis. Dozens of clergy, including papal posse member Father Gerald Murray, say they are concerned about the resurgence of, quote, gravely harmful moral errors, particularly regarding sexual morality. Called a Pastoral Appeal to the Bishops for an Apostolic Reaffirmation of the Gospel, the letter asks the world's bishops to reaffirm Jesus' teachings and correct error with their full authority as bishops. The priests target what they call the mistaken approach, asserting that those who commit objectively evil acts and judge themselves subjectively free of culpability must be allowed to receive Holy Communion. The statement is an indirect indictment of Pope Francis's exhortation, Amoris Laetitia, that seems, in certain cases, to allow Holy Communion for divorced and civilly remarried Catholics. Joining me now with his thoughts on the priest's appeal and why he feels it's the only way to fix the divisions in the Church is the former prefect of the Apostolic Signature, Cardinal Raymond Leo Burke. Your Eminence, thank you for joining us from Rome.
Well, thank you, Raymond.
Now, as you know, a group of priests from around the world have signed a document. They're calling it a pastoral appeal to the bishops for an apostolic reaffirmation of the gospel. It was signed on April 22nd. It started with about, I think it was 7 or 15 rather, European and American clergymen. It's now expanded. Tell me, why is this coming now, and what does this mean to reaffirm Christ's teachings in the face of what they're calling a pastoral crisis in the church?
Well, the growing confusion and the resulting division in the church is causing a tremendous suffering, most of all for priests, who are the shepherds of the souls of the faithful, and they find so many people coming to them, so many of the faithful who are confused, and when they set forth for them the teaching of the church, many times they're accused of not being faithful to the Roman pontiff, or people simply go and look for a priest who will agree with them instead of setting forth the church's teaching. These priests have very rightly addressed a fundamental point, namely the reality of grace. And this is completely distorted and actually contradicted by a false moral theology, which sadly has been having a great influence now over many decades, which is very much connected with a kind of a philosophical position that the gospel teaching is an ideal, and even our relationship with Christ is an ideal, not a lived reality in which we actually receive from Christ the gift of the Holy Spirit, and therefore, despite our weaknesses, are able to live in accord with the truth of the moral law. And so the priests are rightly asking simply that there be a profession of apostolic faith on the part of the bishops, and that faith would fundamentally express the reality of divine grace in our lives, and what this means for our daily living, and what it means in terms of our disposition to receive the sacraments.
Your Eminence, they are pointing out 10 critical issues that they'd like the bishops to address. One, of course, is reception of communion, and that it cannot be reduced to a private act based on subjective innocence, because it's a public witness. Now, this seems to go back to Amoris Laetitia, and my question to you is, since Amoris Laetitia was promulgated and the Pope opened the door to those who have been divorced and remarried without an annulment going to communion, presenting themselves to communion and receiving it, we have seen petitions of thousands of people around the world. Now we have this priest petition. Why is this different, and why are you supporting them?
Well, I have supported all of the efforts, and perhaps not as vocally, all of the efforts to reaffirm the Church's teaching with regard to the necessary dispositions to receive the sacraments, and especially the public nature of the reception of the sacraments, and that our disposition is a question of a public state in the Church, and therefore cannot be reduced to my private conception of whether or not I'm worthy to receive the sacraments. I have wanted to support this in particular because in my travels, I meet so many priests and even bishops around the world who are undergoing a tremendous suffering because of all of the confusion about these are the most fundamental truths of our faith. And so I wanted to show my support for these priests, and also I am particularly convinced with regard to the point they make that this error, even though now we see it in a very exacerbated form, this error has actually been around in the Church, if you want to say that, or been attacking the life of the Church now for many decades, and we need simply to address it by professing our apostolic faith and living it.
Your Eminence, you said, and I quote here, in supporting this statement, the only remedy is the reaffirmation of the apostolic faith by the successors of the apostles. What form should that take? What would this affirmation look like? And is it a correction of the Holy Father? Is that what you're talking about here?
No, I'm talking here about simply a bishop stating for his people, making making a profession of faith for his people, which would then invite them, obviously, to be one with him in that profession of faith. And integral to that profession of faith would be our belief that our Lord Jesus Christ, seated at the right hand of the Father, is alive and active on our behalf in the church through the outpouring of the Holy Spirit from his glorious pure start into our hearts, so that we live in Christ, that Christ is always present, that he can always, that he will always assist us if we're striving to lead a good and upright life and to do what is correct. As one person who was living in irregular union said to me, who had previously been advised by a priest that he could simply begin to receive the sacraments again, he then wrote to me, and after I explained to him why he couldn't, he said that this is what in my conscience I understood, that I'm living publicly in a state of sin, and that until I can rectify the situation, I'm not rightly prepared to approach either the sacrament of penance or to receive our Lord in Holy Communion.
Your Eminence, you spoke to a conference in Rome really on the confusion in the church today and this tension. Now, some say you are the source of that confusion. And I've heard some of your critics say, well, it's Cardinal Burke and those like him that are creating the confusion. The Pope has been very clear in his teaching that he's trying to be merciful. He wants to open these sacraments up to those who have fallen away. In your speech, you spoke about the limits of papal power, and you talked about perhaps the need of a fraternal correction. What would that look like, and what would you say to those critics?
Well, to the critics, I would simply say that I am trying to the best of my ability to present what the Church has always taught and practiced. I believe that part of our suffering in the present time is a kind of politicization of the Church, where now suddenly we have various parties in the Church. St. Paul actually confronted this in the early Christian communities. He says, one says, I follow Paul, one says, I follow Apollo, and he, or someone else, and he said, but we follow only Jesus Christ. So in this presentation on April 7th in Rome, I simply presented what the Church has always understood with regard to the fullness of power of the Roman Pontiff. The Church has always maintained that the Roman Pontiff had to have the fullness of power in order to safeguard and promote the Church's teaching and her practice. It was never understood that he had this fullness of power to create some new teaching or to generate some revolutionary church, as is seemingly appealing to some people today. And so my efforts are to return us to the sacred tradition, to the living reality of the Church, of Christ's life as it's been handed down to us along the Christian centuries. And I am not the enemy of the Pope. I am not belonging to any political party. I'm simply trying to be a teacher of the faith and a shepherd of souls. And this is, in the present time, it's necessary to remind all of us of these fundamental understandings with regard to our life in the Church. And now, because some people are saying, well, the Pope has the fullness of power, he can do whatever he wants. And that's ridiculous, because the Pope is the first among us who must be obedient to Christ. It's Christ who's the head of the Church. The Pope is his vicar on earth. And by being his vicar on earth, he is most of all held to be obedient to Christ and to try in every way to serve Christ as the principal source of unity. He, the Pope, being the principle of unity in the Church, as Christ wanted when he made Peter the head of the Apostolic College.
Your Eminence, what, just to follow up, what would that fraternal correction look like, assuming your fellow bishops and cardinals decided that there needed to be a fraternal correction because the Pope had taken the Church in a direction that deviated from tradition?
Well, the form of it is found fundamentally in Matthew 19, in the Gospel according to St. Matthew, chapter 19. First, there is the cardinals would go to the Pope privately and make the correction, and then if he accepts the correction and corrects and modifies his way of acting in accord with what the Church has always taught and practiced, then obviously the correction has achieved its effect. If, however, as the Gospel passage goes on to say, if he refuses, then the matter has to be brought to the community, and because the Church is a public reality. The whole community has to be aware if there's some serious difficulty in the direction of the Church, and so then the cardinals would have to state this correction in a way so that all of the faithful could be alerted and therefore not be led astray.
Mm-hmm. Your Eminence, we are seeing, you mentioned a moment ago, the politicization of the Church today, and I agree with you. I've never seen a more political approach to issues that were settled and just part of Catholic teaching, held from time immemorial. Yeah. Now everything seems to be up for grabs. The German bishops are meeting at the Vatican today with the Pope to discuss intercommunion for Protestant spouses. So if you have a Protestant spouse and you're a Catholic, they may be allowed and could go forward to receive Holy Communion even though they're not Catholic. In February, a majority of German bishops voted on a proposal granting that permission. Okay? There were 7 bishops who abstained and said this is not subject to vote. Pope Benedict, it has been reported by Ed Penton and others, is standing with those 7 bishops. They're all meeting with the Pope today. Your take on this? What are we seeing? What should we take from this?
Well, the answer, once again, is the apostolic faith. In other words, one is disposed to receive Holy Communion when one is in full communion with Christ and his mystical body, the Church. And if someone does not have the Catholic faith and is not in communion with the Catholic faith, it's simply a contradiction to invite that person to receive the Holy Eucharist, which is the fullness of our life in the Church. The most important day in anyone's life is his first Holy Communion, in the sense that at that moment he shares fully in the life of the Church and the grace that Christ gives us in the Church. What's at work here, in my judgment, is something very closely connected with the politicization, and that is sentimentalism. In other words, people want to do nice things on the occasion of a First Holy Communion or some other event, and so they simply say to the non-Catholic party, well, you are free to receive Holy Communion, but what does that mean if the person doesn't believe in the Holy Eucharist? If the person is not in full communion with the Catholic Church, it's a contradiction. Mm-hmm. And this kind of, if this goes on, the whole faith in the Holy Eucharist will be diminished, confused, diminished, perhaps even lost by some, and we'll end up with what we have in the Christian churches today, that is with a large number of ecclesial communities who no longer believe in the real presence, who no longer believe in the Holy Eucharist as the Church has always taught about the Holy Eucharist. Mm-hmm. So this sentimentalism has entered in and causing now yet another source of division and hurt for many people.
Yeah. Before I let you go, there's a controversy in Bavaria. The premier there has ordered that all public buildings have crosses placed above their entrance or at the entranceway. Now we have a message from Cardinal Raymond Marx, who is saying this is a source of division, unrest, and animosity. He's condemning the premier's decision. Your reaction to that, the cross being placed at public places?
Now, Christ is never a cause of division. The image of our Lord on the crucifix is never the source of hurt to anyone or a cause of dividing people one from the other. I think it's most appropriate in a Christian nation, which Bavaria is, to have crosses in public places. And this ought to be a comfort to people of all religions who are living in that nation, because they know that in this nation there is respect for our Lord and for the moral law which He represents, and for a life in community, a life of good order and of peace, which Christ brings. And so this kind of gesture also, to me, it's a kind of a political gesture. It's a kind of a show to try to say, oh, look how accepting we are of everyone. But by doing that, we deny our own identity, and in fact, we rob people of something that's very, very important, namely the symbol of the reality of the Christian faith.
Your Eminence, Cardinal Raymond Burke, thank you for being here. We'll check in with you soon, but before long, I hope.
Thank you, Raymond. I hope so, too.
We'll see you soon. Before we go to George Weigel, here are some other important stories to share with you. Victims of the Chilean clerical abuse scandal met with Pope Francis this week. The victims said the Pope was open, sympathetic, and deeply impacted by their situation. At one point, Pope Francis admitted to being, quote, part of the problem. Juan Carlos Cruz was one of 3 victims of Chilean abuser Father Fernando Caradima. He said the Holy Father directly apologized and seemed truly sorry. He also felt that the Pope was hurting over his missteps and their pain.
I did tell him that it hurt me tremendously, what he had not said and what he had said when he called us, he called calumnias, lies. And when he, I've been speaking up for years, so has Jimmy, so has Jose Andres. I said to him that it was hard for me to understand that our neighbor from Argentina wouldn't know what was happening.
Meanwhile, in Australia, a judge has ruled that Vatican Cardinal George Pell must stand trial on charges stemming from decades-old allegations of abuse. Magistrate Belinda Wallington dismissed about half of the very serious charges against Cardinal Pell, but decided the prosecution's case was strong enough for the remainder of the charges to warrant a trial. The number of charges and specific details of the cases have not been made public. Pell, who is on leave from his duties at the Vatican, was charged last June with sexually abusing multiple victims in his home state of Victoria. Cardinal Pell has long denied any wrongdoing. This week, he entered a plea of not guilty. The trials are expected to begin within weeks. My next guest has written the definitive biographies of Pope John Paul II, and tonight he joins us to discuss his latest work. In it, he examines the turbulence in America, the Church, and the world since the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's called The Fragility of Order, Catholic Reflections on Turbulent Times. Please welcome back to the show, George Weigel. George, great to see you. George, I want to start with, in the Crux interview with you recently about your new book, you are not alarmed by what you're seeing coming out of Rome and by these synods. Why not?
I'm not as alarmed as some.
Okay.
I think that a lot of ballast was put into the bark of Peter by John Paul II and Benedict XVI, so that this is not 1968 or 1978.
Some would like it to be.
All over again. I'm also encouraged by the fact that Catholic light continues to fail around the world, and the living parts of the Church, wherever you go, North America, Europe, Africa, Asia, Latin America, wherever, are the parts of the Church that have embraced the magisterium of John Paul II and Benedict XVI as the authentic interpretation of Vatican II, and the moribund or dying or dead parts of the Church, including the German-speaking world, are those that continue to try to make the failed project of Catholic light work. So the empirical evidence is that the ship continues to move forward,
Yeah.
although the ship is sailing through some turbulent seas.
Well, and at times the Germans are captaining that ship. Look, Caspar really drove the bus along with many of his confreres in Germany. They were at the front end of that family synod that produced Amoris Laetitia. They seem to also be involved in the youth synod. We're seeing what's happening in different parts of their internal community. Let's talk about that. There was a big meeting at the Vatican today. German bishops were supposedly meet with the Pope to come to a decision on whether to grant communion to Protestant spouses of Catholics. It looks like the CDF is sending it back to the bishops and saying, come up in an ecumenical spirit with a unanimous decision that you all can agree on. Is that sufficient to you?
Let's think about the whole German situation. The church is dying in the German-speaking parts of Europe. Catholic practice is cratering. Vocations are way down. It has always been unclear to me why prominent members of the German hierarchy have been pressing this communion for divorced and remarried Catholics, and now the intercommunion.
Right.
Because these things go on all the time anyway.
Right.
In
Germany.
In Germany. But what we're failing to come to grips with here is what would seem a fairly obvious fact of sacramental theology. It cannot be the case that what is a mortal sin in Poland is a source of grace 2 kilometers away on the other side of the Polish-German border. There's this local option Catholicism is really not very logical. And it's indeed not very sacramental, which is the more important point.
It fractures the universality of the Church, which is its hallmark.
The other thing that I point out in the 2 chapters on the synods in this new book is that very few other bishops were buying the Caspar argument in 2014 or 2015. There were 4 different variants of the Caspar proposal tried at the Synod of 2015, and none of them received anything remotely approaching a 2/3 endorsement. Then Amoris Laetitia came along and decided to go the ambiguity route in that one famous footnote. But there's no evidence whatsoever that there is, that Caspar and his colleagues have won the day in terms of the argument throughout the world church. What has been created is an enormous amount of confusion. But to go back to my original point, the living parts of the church are getting on with living, preaching, offering, proposing what they know to be the truth. And I think a lot of the static that you and I have to endure in the Catholic blogosphere, people are just not paying attention to, and that's just as well, because it'll mess up your head.
Yeah, well, but again, the things that you've spent the large part of your career explaining, collecting for people, holding on to, advancing, the legacy of John Paul, Benedict XVI, the clarity of the council. This is what was meant. This is the official version of what we believe the council taught. That seems to be up for grabs in ways we've never seen before. And I worry about the politicization of it, as Cardinal Burke said earlier, the politicization where we have factions forming, where you've got this group of bishops, and here are 7 other German bishops and Benedict XVI on this side. Why are we in this moment? How did we get here?
I believe that the truth wins, ultimately, because truth has power. And the implausibility of these alternative proposals makes them unlikely to succeed over the long haul. I think it's unfortunate that the Holy Father seems not to understand that Catholic light is not an effective pastoral approach. I completely agree with him that we need to find ways to make these truths more accessible to people and more compelling, and that we need always to meet people where they are. The point is, we don't leave people where they are.
Right.
There's been a lot of talk and a lot of misuse of St. Augustine's image of the ladder of love. Well, we all start pretty low on the ladder, but the point of pastoral accompaniment is to challenge us
Progress, yeah.
to rise higher. This is what the living parts of the church understand, and that's why Catholic light ultimately fails.
Let's talk about something that you raise in, and this is a collection of essays that you wrote over a long period of time that you're collecting in the Fragility of Order. You've also written recently about the diversification of the College of Cardinals and how this is problematic because there is not the unity that these men should have. What would be your recommendation?
Well, in my Catholic Press column this week, I said, look, it's a good thing that we have a less Italianate and more universal College of Cardinals.
But
That only becomes operationally good if they know each other, and they don't. Pope Francis has not called the College of Cardinals together to meet as a body since early 2014, when there was pushback against Cardinal Casper's lecture. This is a very bad idea. So I'm hoping that in the future there will be occasions for these men to meet and get to know each other. My other suggestion in that column is that we should change the rules of the conclave so that once the cardinal electors, those under 80 years old, are locked up in the Vatican, there will be no votes for 3 days. That would give them a chance to take the measure of each other, and it would give the world press a break. It would give a pause. It would lower the temperature. Because as you remember, in 2013, one of the dynamics at work was we've got to get this done quickly to demonstrate the unity of the church.
Right.
And I kept saying, no, what you actually have to do is get it done right.
Right. Demonstrate the competency of the College of Cardinals.
So I think building in a break at the front end of a conclave, at least structurally, creates the conditions for the possibility of a more measured decision.
I was reading the book when I was watching Headlines Cross, and there's a chapter called The Lessons from the Communist Assault on the Church.
Right.
Tell us about that, and I want you to contrast the ideas therein with what we heard from Cardinal Marx this week, which was Karl Marx is this great figure, a revolutionary who's an inspiration, and we wouldn't have the social doctrine of the church without him. Your take?
It was a somewhat striking and indeed bizarre comment. I mean, if what Cardinal Marx meant was that Marx and Engels created a fuss that the church had to
react to,
fine. But in fact, Catholic social doctrine, in its intellectual origins, goes back to a German bishop, Wilhelm Emanuel von Ketteler, whom I assume Cardinal Marx has at least
has
heard
a familiarity
of,
with,
if not read, because Leo XIII said he was the student of von Ketteler when he wrote Rerum Novarum. The real problem today, though, is not one-off comments from Cardinal Marx. The real problem in not learning from this experience of the communist assault on the church in the past is in this reported proposed deal between the Holy See and China.
Yep.
It is an extraordinarily bad idea to let now the Chinese Communist Party, not even the state, but the Chinese Communist Party, nominate bishops. This is an extremely bad idea. It's a violation of canon law. More to the point, it's a violation of the church's own self-understanding.
Right.
This cannot go forward in the form that it now is being discussed without doing grave damage to the evangelical mission of the church in China in the future.
Earlier in the headlines, I reported on Cardinal George Pell, who is head of the Vatican Financial Secretariat. He was swept away, really the second time in his career, on the same charges in some cases. In Australia, he's defending himself. Looks like he'll face 2 trials. These cases, which I've looked in vast detail examined, it seems as if neither of them really have any credibility. One guy is an ex-con. The other, which involves a church and a young person who claims they were abused, one of the guys died. The mother says, he told me that Pell didn't do anything. Why is this happening to George Pell, and what is your sense about where this case will end?
I hope and believe it should end in his vindication. There is no truth to any of this. This is a combination of bad police work, bad Australian politics, a judge who did not have, a magistrate, she's not even a judge, did not have the courage to say this is all rubbish, even though she said that on 2 of the charges going forward, I would not vote to convict.
Right.
But a jury should decide. Well, if, come on, if there's not enough there, why are we going forward on this? I wrote last summer, Raymond, at the time when all of this began, that it did not seem to be accidental that this was taking place at the time when Cardinal Pell, who is literally my oldest friend in the world, we met in 1967, was getting down to some very serious financial corruption involving various forces around the world, but specifically in Italy. And I still continue to think that it's not an accident, that there is some connection
that these
between his
revived.
work in Rome, or ginned up.
Right.
Or simply ginned.
The timing is curious.
The timing is instructive.
Let's move on to Regensburg, which you talk about in the book. Of course, I remember covering this live, and it was an astounding, when you saw that full Regensburg address of Benedict XVI in context, it was an amazing, brilliant critique and challenge to the Islamic world. Have they responded? There were some back and forth, some dialogue. Have they responded to the questions he really posed?
I was at a meeting in Rome this past December, organized by the Religious Freedom Institute here in Washington, a dialogue between Christian and Islamic scholars and jurists. And I think there has been some forward progress. The point that Pope Benedict made, or one of the points that he made, that Islam has to find within its own philosophical, religious, legal resources an Islamic argument for religious toleration. I think there are some signs that that's beginning to happen. And the talk I gave at that conference in Rome in December, when I explained this is what the Catholic Church had to go through. We had to recover some lost elements in our own tradition in order to get to the Second Vatican Council. And the Declaration on Religious Freedom is now being circulated among Islamic jurists and scholars, and may even have gotten to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who seems at least intellectually interested in these problems. So it's not fast progress, but I think the more reflective parts of that world understand that they've got a big problem, and perhaps we might be of some help to them in solving it. For Islam to come to grips with religious toleration and with social pluralism does not necessarily mean a wholesale surrender to modernity, any more than the Catholic Church's coming to grips with religious freedom and separation of church and state involved a wholesale surrender to modernity.
Before I let you go, your perspective and insight on this synodality we've been seeing, where the Pope calls synods to hash out and argue in a public way doctrine, pastoral practice, particularly pastoral practice, as regards the family, and now we have this youth synod coming in the fall on youth and vocation. Given what you've seen in the preparatory just a few weeks ago, and that document the bishops will be using to guide their discussions, do you have high hopes for this synod?
I don't think anyone has figured out how to make the Synod of Bishops work since it first met in 1967. And it's frankly not working very well now. The Synod General Secretariat has a very specific point of view that it tries to forward. It's not reluctant to throw a few elbows in getting that point of view.
So you've written,
advanced.
you believe they manipulated.
Yeah, they obviously did, and it's ludicrous for Cardinal Baldassare to say, as he did recently, that there was no contention at these synods. I mean, I didn't imagine what I saw in front of my eyes in October 2015. I think it does, these things do identify issues that require serious conversation, but most of the serious conversation at synods takes place during the coffee breaks, lunch, dinner, and in what I call the off-Broadway parts of the synod. And that's not bad. I mean, this is an important, I've met people during the off-Broadway parts of synods that have genuinely filled out my understanding of different parts of the world church, and I hope I've been of some help to them. So that's good stuff. But the actual process itself is not terribly productive. And then, of course, what came out of the Synod of 2015 was not what was written, at least in full, in Amoris Laetitia. So the relationship between the Synod and the teaching authority of the Pope remains something else to be sorted out.
And this youth synod, what do you think it will ultimately focus on? I mean, there's a lot of, the document itself is self-contradictory. We want church teaching to change. We relish a recapitulation of church teaching and a more vibrant call to holiness. So it contradicts itself throughout the document.
What I hope happens is that the bishops, who are the Synod Fathers, meet probably in the off-Broadway parts of the Synod. A lot of Catholic youth ministries that actually work. I have seen the draft of the working document for the Synod, the so-called Instrumentum Laboris. There is not a single reference in it to a vital, vibrant Catholic youth ministry. There's all of this stuff about how difficult it is to hear what the church teaches, but there's no reflection on the people who have heard it
and are doing it
and are embodying it and are living it joyfully and are offering it to others. So there's a bit too much self-deprecation going on here, I think. And frankly, it doesn't work. I mean, young people are not interested in a church that kowtows to them.
No.
The genius of John Paul II was that he challenged young people. In a world that panders to them, he challenged them. He challenged them with compassion. He said, look, I mean, you're not going to do it right all the time. Seek reconciliation and forgiveness and try again. But don't ever settle for anything less than the spiritual and moral grandeur that the grace of God makes possible in your life. I want to see that said at Synod 2018. But the early returns are not looking too good.
Hopeful. Yeah, well, that line about you were made to set yourself apart from the world. That notion that John Paul put forward, and you talk about accompaniment. Who accompanied young people better than John Paul II in his personal ministry and then as Pope? I mean, it was a spectacular thing to witness, and one that, I'll be frank, I watch sometimes and go, what is he doing? Why is he doing this? Now you see why he was doing it. He was planting seeds that now are blossoming. But why aren't we listening and looking at that example, George? Whether it's Familias Consortio or it's his approach to the young, it's like the pontificate never happened.
Well, let's even look at an American organization here. Focus, the Fellowship of Catholic University
Curtis Martin's great
is
group.
one of the most successful and important Catholic youth ministries in the world. It is a direct outgrowth of World Youth Day 1993 in Denver. Where is that experience in this Synod reflection? I'm going to try to make sure that it's at least conceptually there in my own writing about this this fall. But surely Curtis Martin and his colleagues are people that anyone interested in youth ministry that's effective would want to talk to.
Right, and hear their voices and their lived experience, which is valuable and continuing to draw young people today. George Weigel, thank you for being here. The Fragility of Order, Catholic Reflections on Turbulent Times is in bookstores everywhere. Thank you for being here. And the book is also at the EWTN Religious Catalog and wherever books are sold. And a little more news to share with you. Planned Parenthood is suing the Trump administration over a grant program that could shift millions of dollars away from it and other abortion providers. The lawsuit filed Wednesday seeks to block new guidelines for Health and Human Services Title X grant program, which funds contraception and family planning programs for low-income Americans. The Trump administration's new guidelines would fund organizations that stress abstinence and natural family planning. Planned Parenthood serves about 40% of the 4 million low-income Americans who received subsidized services through the Title X family planning program. As such, the abortion giant could take a $100 million hit if those grants were diverted elsewhere. The projected budget for the Title X grant is about $260 million. Also on Wednesday, Iowa's Republican-led legislature approved the country's strictest abortion measure to date. If signed by the governor, most abortions would be banned once a fetal heartbeat is detected, usually around 6 weeks of pregnancy. Governor Kim Reynolds would not say directly if she would sign the bill, but she pointed to her clear pro-life record. Backers of the measure expect an immediate court challenge if signed into law. In 2013, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals struck down a 15-week abortion ban from both North Dakota and Arkansas, and the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear those cases. We'll keep you posted on this story. And later this month, Ireland faces a landmark referendum that would repeal its country's constitutional protections for the unborn. Amendment 8, as it is known, recognizes the right to life of the mother and the unborn child equally. Currently, abortion is allowed only in the rare cases when the mother's life is in danger. Amendment 8 was passed overwhelmingly in a similar referendum in 1983. Right now, the predominantly Roman Catholic country has the strictest abortion laws in Europe, but that could change on May 25th. The Prime Minister, who leads the center-right Fine Gael party, has been campaigning to repeal Amendment 8. He said if it is repealed, the government would then pass a measure allowing abortion on demand up to the 12th week of pregnancy. Right now, polls indicate that the measure will pass. However, the vote is tightening. To comment on the referendum and which way the vote could go, I recently sat down with former EU Parliament candidate and businessman DECLAN GANLEY. Take a look. Tell me about this 8th Amendment of the Irish Constitution. This essentially protects equally the life of the mother and her unborn child. Why is this referendum coming forward now, and what would it achieve?
The reason that the referendum is coming forward now is because the 8th Amendment, as you've pointed out, is an amendment to the Irish Constitution that recognizes the right to life of the preborn child and the right to life of the mother, of course. It's a thorn in the side of the global pro-abortion movement because this is a constitution that recognizes what of course is true, scientifically, demonstrably true, which is that these are unique human individuals and they deserve human rights. And when you have a constitution that recognizes the human rights of the preborn child, that's something that the likes of George Soros and Atlantic Philanthropies, Chuck Feeney's operation want to remove, because this is a shining light, an example of where the arc of history is headed, which is that it is inevitable, I believe, that human rights of preborn children are going to be recognized everywhere. They want to snuff that light out in Ireland, and that's why so much money has been pouring into Ireland to cause this referendum to happen in the first place and to try and strip the 8th Amendment out of the Irish Constitution.
And who is behind this referendum movement? Who's driving this? Who's financing it?
Well, George Soros has reportedly financed Amnesty International's Irish operations. And in fact, the funding that was made available there to campaign to remove the 8th Amendment and to campaign for this referendum, the Irish campaign finance regulator, it's called SIPO in Ireland, SIPO, Standard and Public's Office organisation, they have ordered that that money must be returned, that actually it was illegal financing.
Wow.
And the Irish operation of Amnesty are refusing to return that money.
Give me a sense of the political dimension here. Both your Prime Minister as well as the opposition party leader are supporting this referendum, meaning stripping the Constitution of the protections for unborn children. Why are both parties marching in lockstep here?
It's amazing that you have no major political party in Ireland, not one, prepared to stand up for our existing constitution and the existing human rights recognized by the Constitution. They have been caught up in this very fashionable internationalist pro-abortion campaign. They want to be seen to be moving within that crowd, and they have signed up to try and strip their own constitution of this human right. It beggars belief that, in fact, even in politics, that one of the two largest parties wouldn't recognise the political opportunity to represent half of the Irish population that have no major political party to speak for them on this issue. Mind you, it's a referendum, which means it doesn't matter that all of the political parties are lined up on one side and the people are lined up on the other side. We had exactly this situation in the Lisbon Treaty referendums. In fact, you had me on back then, 10 years ago now, Raymond, where we had all the political parties and all the political leaders on one side and the people on the other side. We were behind in the polls all the way up to voting day, and we won in 2008. Now, they made us vote again a year later. We didn't win that one because that's democracy, their style. They're not going to be able to do that this time.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. How, if they don't win the referendum this time, what makes you think they won't try again?
This has come at a very expensive political price. They didn't calculate this. They thought that this would go like the same-sex marriage referendum in
2015,
which was a steamroller. They presumed that the same people would line up on their side. That hasn't happened. It's a very interesting thing. The hacking of empathy cannot be done for abortion in the way that it's done for other causes. It's hard to try and tell people that this isn't about abortion or about the rights of the preborn child. Ultimately, we're being asked to vote on one thing, not women's rights or anything else. The one thing is do we want to take the rights recognized by the Constitution of preborn boys and girls in Ireland out of the Constitution so that they have no legal protection at all? And when you frame that question that way, because that's the only thing we're voting on, the polls swing the other way. A vast majority do not want to strip away all human rights from our preborn.
Okay, you've got all political parties in Ireland aligned with this removal of these rights from the Constitution. They're supporting a yes vote on the referendum. Who is behind the no vote? Where is the resistance coming from? It's got to be organized at some level. I know you're involved.
There are two major campaigns. There are the Save the Eighth campaign and the Pro-Life Love Both campaign, it's called. There are other campaigns as well. There's Doctors for Life, there's Lawyers for Life, there's all sorts of grassroots, genuine grassroots movements. Every county in Ireland has got its own pro-life organisation. And it's just this phenomenal meshing of a genuine grassroots movement. So I get texts, I'm getting them today. There's a canvass in this village, there's a canvass in this town. You can go, you join those canvasses, you go, there's printed materials available from both campaigns, postering right across the country, which is a big part of Irish political culture, a sort of poster on the village lamppost. And to see that come alive the way that it has, this massive grassroots groundswell. I canvassed Ballygar, County Galway, which is a little town in County Galway, a few nights ago. And in the canvass that I personally did, I didn't find one yes voter, not one, which is interesting because this isn't showing up in the polls. We're hearing from the other side in Twitter posts, etc., where they say, oh, it's 40% on either side and the rest undecided. That's not what these polls are reporting. There's something happening. It's happening at the grassroots level, and I think we're going to win this.
This is very personal to you. You had a daughter, your youngest daughter, whom the doctors at the time said, there's an abnormality here, you should abort this child. What happened?
So at the time, my wife Delia was in New York. My wife's from Staten Island, and she went into a New York hospital, and she'd had the scans and whatnot, as you do. She was called in and she was told, we've detected an abnormality. It's a high risk. And he said, we recommend an abortion. And my wife said, well, that's not going to happen. And interestingly, he answered, I hoped you were going to say that. My wife happened to be wearing a cross that day. He said, I saw the cross. He wasn't a Christian. He said, I saw the cross. And he said, I was hoping that you'd give that answer. He said, but I had to make the recommendation, I guess, liability or whatever it is. And he said, well, we recommend genetic counseling then. And we decided not to do that either. Well, as it happens, that same girl, Clementine, is a freshman in Notre Dame, and there's nothing wrong with her.
See, sometimes you have to just keep to the faith.
Exactly.
It all works out.
And sometimes they just get it wrong. And the thing is when you take away this wonderful recognition of that you cannot kill your preborn child, because that's what this is. This is about killing. It's a rough way to put it, but it's true. And when you make that an option, people that are frightened sometimes could take that option. Where there's life, there's hope.
Why has the church in Ireland, particularly the primate, Archbishop Diarmuid Martin, has come out and said, we're opting out of the national debate. We are pro-life, we've always been pro-life, we'll continue to be, but we're opting out of the national debate.
The Archprimate of Ireland, so I have seen in the last few weeks, I have to say, some really encouraging, bold moves from a lot of bishops across the country. So just in the last few weeks, many dioceses in Ireland have issued really powerful pastoral letters. And they've been handed out to everybody. They're online, but they're not just online. They're handed out at the masses. That's very unusual. They have leaned forward. The church in Ireland, of course, the bigger problem is in terms of what we're up against. It's not that it's all of the political parties against us. The main abortion campaigner in Ireland is the media, which is there is not one media outlet in Ireland, not one, that is editorially pro-life. Not even one. Right across the board, you have a media-led campaign, and of course the media, that same element of the media, just beat on the Irish Church and have done for a very, very long time, sometimes with just cause, but way overdone in terms of there's never any recognition of the good that the Church does. I spoke at an event up in Donegal a couple of weeks ago. The Bishop of Derry spoke at that event with me, and the guy was heroic. So I have to say it is happening. They are stepping up.
Before I let you go, the final impact of this referendum, what will it be, not only for Ireland, but for the other members of the EU and beyond the borders of the EU? This
is a fight that's concentrated in Ireland on this one occasion, and there are a few times in history, the Battle of the Boyne, the Battle of Ochra, maybe other times where Ireland has been so pivotal on an issue that affected a much broader spectrum than Ireland. This is a fight where you have arrayed against the pro-life movement in Ireland, which is grassroots, the global pro-abortion movement. Julie Kay, who was a lawyer for Planned Parenthood, called Ireland the jewel in the crown of the global pro-life movement. That's what Planned Parenthood's lawyer said. It's a few years ago. They knew they had to take this down and they had to take this Eighth Amendment out. Why? Because it points to the future. It points to the irrefutable truth that preborn boys and girls are humans too and therefore deserve human rights. They must destroy it. We are behind in the polls. I think we'll be behind in the polls all the way up to voting day. I'm not saying we will win, but I'm saying with enough hard work and resources, we can win on the 25th of May.
Declan Ganley, thank you for being here, and we will continue to watch this referendum, its outcome, and the next move for Ireland.
Thank you. God bless.
Thank you. The abortion referendum in Ireland will be held on Friday, May 25th. Well, that is all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. And this is Children's Book Week. Grab a book, read it to your nearest and dearest. Of course, the Will Wilder series is out in paperback now, both books 1 and 2. But there's so many options. Make sure you take a moment and do that with your children this week. Until then, We'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.